In Australia, the coalition has plunged to a record low primary vote in the latest Newspoll. Sussan Ley's frontbench reshuffle now being seen as a high-stakes move to steady the party amid internal turmoil and falling support. For more, let's head to Melbourne. We're joined by Professor Chris Berg from RMIT. Great to see you as always. How damaging is this record low Newspoll result for the coalition?
Look, it's obviously not great. I don't think it's that damaging because, frankly, I don't think that the opposition thinks that it's in a position to win and hold government, whether after the next election or even a few more elections after that. The challenge in front of the opposition right now is to steady the ship, identify challenges that the Albanese government might not be stepping up to, and try to hammer the government away on that. But I don't think anybody's under the illusion that this will be a quick return to power.
Yeah, and we've seen some big changes, obviously a recordly bad result earlier this year at the federal election where Peter Dutton was opposition leader, replaced by a female, of course, by Sussan Ley, and there have been high hopes, but already there seems to be a lot of frustration with her leadership style. We've heard from Sarah Henderson, who is no longer in the cabinet. We've heard from many others, and then along comes the Jacinta Price situation where she made comments about Indian Australians voting Labor. How damaging were those comments, and what's been worse for Sussan Ley's leadership, the original comments within the Indian community or the way she's handled it and the way that her colleagues now feel about her?
Look, I don't think the comments were very helpful with the Indian community, obviously, but shadow cabinet members make strange comments all the time. The real challenge that Sussan Ley faced was that Jacinta Price was unwilling to explicitly support her as leader when asked a couple of times. And that puts Sussan Ley in sort of a fixed position. If you do not support the leader, then you cannot continue to have the role. Now, that's completely separate from whether Jacinta Price's observations about the Indian community were politically were good political ideas, or whether they were accurate and all those sorts of things. And that's a debate, obviously, that a lot of people in the party want to have. They want to bring immigration to the forefront. And Sussan Ley, having seen the fairly immigration-focused policy that that Peter Dutton brought to the election when he was opposition leader, has decided to, well, at least push away a little bit from that, or at least quieten that down. And you can see that a lot of people across the party are have similar views.
It is such a tricky one for anyone in opposition, particularly for a Conservative party, because on the one hand, you've got people say, look, we've got housing shortages, we need to look after and fix our problems here. We shouldn't be having as high immigration. We're seeing protests around the country about mass immigration, indeed around the world at the moment too. But on the other hand, a lot of these immigrants who are coming from Chinese Indian communities also run small businesses, which traditionally have been a huge supporter of the Liberal coalition.
Yeah, this is really difficult. It's particularly difficult for politicians that need to run local campaigns. And you'll see a really sharp divergence sometimes between what the national leadership will say about immigration policy and then what the local members who are having to campaign in communities, sometimes often in very diverse and ethnic background communities, have to or feel that they should be doing. And in those local campaigns, you can see them reaching out to the small business owners, the conservative leaning communities, the Chinese communities, the Indian communities, and so forth, in part because they have to, that's part of the electorate, but also in part because they see that there is a natural resonance and a similar message that can be sold that of liberal values, of a focus on free enterprise. There's a reason that people move from China to come to Australia, and there's a reason that people move from India to come to Australia, and that's for a freer and more wealthy economy. And selling that message should be a bit of a no-brainer, but it is difficult because we do have really substantial housing problems. We do have really substantial problems at the national level as well.
A really, really tricky one for Sussan Ley to navigate, obviously, because by supporting the Indian community, she then is pushing aside an Aboriginal MP who has been, coming leaps and bounds. Many expected that Jacinta Price would actually one day become an opposition leader, if not a Prime Minister, leader of the party. This reshuffle has brought in some Conservative names, which many had said had been missing from Sussan Ley's cabinet, portfolio, shadow ministry, I should say. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, so obviously Sussan Ley has decided to rebalance towards the Conservative. If you're going to lose one Conservative member or one Conservative shadow cabinet member, then you're going to have to replace her with another Conservative shadow cabinet member as well. But she's also, so she's brought in Claire Chandler, she's brought in Simon Kennedy, both of which are relatively Conservative. She's also elevated Senator James Paterson, who is seen also as one of the more Conservative members, elevated him to the internal leadership group as well. So you can see that Sussan Ley is trying to shore up her Conservative supporters. Now, I don't think that this is a challenge for Sussan Ley as leader at this stage. I don't think there's anybody waiting in the wings really desperate to take on the role that Sussan Ley has at the moment. It is a thankless role, being the first opposition leader out the back of a absolutely devastating election. It is very unlikely, given history, that Sussan Ley will make it to become Prime Minister, because sort of traditionally that's how difficult those opposition roles are. And so I don't think there is this serious challenge, but what Sussan Ley will be concerned about is that the internal infighting or internal bickering won't lose her the leadership, but will just blunt any coalition measures against the government. And that seems to be what we're seeing at the moment.
What's going on at the moment with Conservative governments around the world? We're seeing it in Australia with the coalition federally. We're seeing it in Victoria with the coalition, cruising to a fourth election defeat. I can only remember them being in power once or twice in my lifetime from a state level. Then you look around the world and you see the Tories being overtaken by the Reform Party, Nigel Farage's Reform Party in the UK. Without Trump, I can't imagine that the Republican Party would have been able to get very far against the Democrats either. What is happening to Conservative parties?
Look, we're obviously living through a populist age, and leaders that are unable to, or at least on the Conservative side, leaders that are unable to ride that populist wave are not succeeding. Now, I think in Victoria, we've got some quite specific issues here around personalities. It's a very small party. It's a very small press gallery as well. It's a small community, and big personalities can create oversized problems as well. But I think underlying so much of this is the housing problem. The housing crisis has become so severe, has limited the opportunities for so much of the population, that people are looking for explanations and public policy positions that might be able to solve the housing crisis. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people have narrowed those challenges down to immigration. I'm not convinced that reducing immigration will materially change house prices. I think the house price problem is a supply problem rather than a demand problem. But a lot of people intuitively think
dates way further back than 3 years of one federal government. It has gone for a very long time. It's state, it's local councils, it's federal government, obviously, and as you mentioned, blaming immigration forgets the fact that many of these immigrants bringing in is to fix the labour shortage to build new houses.
That's absolutely right. Look, I dated all the way back to the 1970s when there was a movement within the urban planning community to really lock up, to really close down the opportunities to build up suburbs and build up cities as well. So that's absolutely right. And blaming this problem on one government or one level of government is the wrong thing to do. Ultimately, we have a massive multifaceted problem around how do we build more houses. Now, it's easy, I think, for Conservative parties to look at the immigration numbers and say, well, the problem is we've got too many people want to buy houses. But frankly, we are building fewer houses than we did a decade ago. That's a problem no matter what the immigration numbers are.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Always appreciate your insights. Plenty more to get through. We'll see you again next week. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.